Okay, so for this portion of the video, I will be using the easy ANOVA function. So essentially with this approach, there are certain things that we have to be concerned about. So the first thing is the assumption of sphericity. So, I mentioned in the previous video that sphericity essentially, or that assumption of sphericity referred to the assumption that the differences in variances between the treatment levels are roughly equal. So what this means is that whenever you take your scores and you compute the differences between each pairs of conditions, or the differences in scores for each condition, the variances should be roughly equal. Because if they're not, if we violate the assumption of sphericity, our F ratio will be thrown off. So you're gonna get obviously you're gonna get an inaccurate F ratio. The next thing that we have to worry about is setting orthogonal contrast if we're going to be using type 3 sum of squares, which we are. So we have to worry about setting them to be orthogonal, or really independent. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to tackle contrast, just because I want to get that out the way so badly. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to set not rude to moderately rude and asshole. So I coded not rude as not, and then the moderately rude and asshole as some. So I set my weights here. I'm going to run that command. Now the next one I'm going to do, I'm going to compare moderately rude to asshole. And one big thing here is whenever you're doing contrast, you don't want to use the same group twice. So Andy Fields, in his book, he mentioned it kind of like cutting a piece of cake. So whenever you cut those pieces off, you can't stick them back on, because it's already been compared. And second off, if you trying to stick a piece of cake back onto the big cake, that's just mad disrespectful. Especially if you done touched it and the next person comes and they look at the piece of cake and they're like, why'd you even touch that? Anyways, regardless, just don't do it. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to combine these variables into contrast rudeness. So I'm going to use that particular command to combine both of the contrasts and put them for our rudeness. And to make sure that R did what we told it to do, we're going to run this particular command and we can check it. So we can see here that our weights have been set, and now we can compare not rude to rude, some rude, and then the other group too. So now the next thing that we can do, we do the same thing for social class. So I'm going to run that command, comparing low class to some class, which is middle and upper, and then comparing middle class to upper class, mid versus up. And then we're going to use this final command to combine them together to make a contrast for social class. And we can check to see that it did it, and it has. So now that we've set our contrast, now we can use the easy ANOVA function. So I'm going to run that, and run this command. And essentially with this command, you're telling R to create this model based off of the data set that you're pulling from, which is this, your dependent variable or your outcome variable, which is our attractiveness rating, your participants, where you're pulling that data from, which is from your participants, our between measures, which is our independent variable, and as I mentioned, it was gender, so we're going to put gender there. Our within group measures, variables, within group variables. Just repeated measures. That's just easier to say. Repeated measures, class and rudeness. Type. So this is in reference to the type sum of squares that you want to use. You want to use, and I mentioned before, where you're using type 3 sum of squares, so you just type in 3. And now that you've done that, when you do it, all you have to do is type in rating model, and you're going to get the ANOVA. You're going to get the ANOVA conducted on your data set. So the first thing that I do want to look at is sphericity. So like I mentioned, that assumption of sphericity is really, really important, because if we do violate the assumption of sphericity, then that F ratio is going to be completely wrong. So as we see here for the Mauchly's test for sphericity, we see that all of the data that we inputted, not all the data, the variables that we have put in, they are non-significant, which is really good. So that means we don't violate the assumption of sphericity. However, if we did violate the assumption of sphericity, then we would have to look at these sphericity corrections, and that would be here, this bottom portion here. So we would look at the greenhouse geyser corrections, and then we would also look at the Flint. I apologize for that person whose name I just butchered. Corrections, and we would just go based off of these corrections. Now that we have found that we have not violated the assumption of sphericity, we can go ahead and now we can, look at our potential main effects and our potential interaction effects. So looking at number 2, because that's where we first start, we notice that there is no asterisk, and most important, and we know that it's not significant, not only because of the asterisk, but because the p-value is greater than 0.05. So with that being said, we don't have a main effect for gender. However, we do have a main effect for class and a main effect of rudeness. We also have several interaction effects. We have 3 two-way interactions: gender and class, gender and rudeness, and class and rudeness. And then we have a 3-way interaction: gender, class, and rudeness. So this is pretty cool. So then when we get to the interpretations portion of the video, I'll be able to break that down a lot more. The next approach that I wanted to show is the using the LME function. So this is the multi-level linear model approach. With this approach, you don't have to worry about setting up orthogonal contrast, since you're not really worried about using type 3 sum of squares. And then you don't have to worry about sphericity. So there's 2 less things that you have to worry about. So you're pretty much just good to go. But really, I'm not going to talk too much about this one. This is just to show you guys what it looks like, and essentially you're doing the same thing when it comes to contrast. You're just setting up those contrasts that you want. You're doing those. You run them, and it combines the this command combines the variables into contrast that you want. Essentially, you're doing the same thing for rudeness as well. For rudeness. Now, the only different part is when you come to build your model. So the first thing that you begin with is your baseline model, and this model doesn't hold any predictive variables at all. You specify it, but it's not holding anything. So what you have to go in and do, you just have to add your variables one by one to the model. And if you have a certain theory that guides what you're trying to look at, you would build your model according to that theory. Because if you just throw in random stuff, you can do that. It's just on you if you want to make your work harder. So you want to add in your predictor variables one at a time, like I mentioned, and you can do this by using the update function. So as you continuously update, you're going to be creating a model for, rudeness. Well, not rudeness. You're going to start with creating your first model, which is rudeness. And just as you continue to use the update function, you're going to be adding on to the previous model that you used. So for example, rudeness, it'll build off of the baseline model. And then class is going to build off of the rudeness model, and so forth and so on. And you want to include your interactions as well. So we've included rudeness and gender, class and gender, rudeness and class, and then your three-way interaction or potential three-way interaction, rudeness, class, and gender. So then when you do that, when you add up first, whenever you finish this model, your final model, then you're going to be adding all of these different models that you have into the ANOVA function. And then you're going to do summary, and it's going to give you everything that you want. So I'm going to run all these. And what we have here, I wish my screen was bigger. Anyways, what we have here, we have all of the predictor variables added into your model. So we really want to look at, you want to look at your p-values, and you also want to look at your L ratio, because this particular value refers to the fit of the model. So as you add your predictor variables, you see the model fit increase. So for rudeness, significant p-value. So you know rudeness has a main effect. Class, when you add that in there, that also has a main effect. And you know it's significant as well because it's less than 0.05. However, when you get to gender, you actually see the same p-value that you had for the ANOVA approach that we did, and this indicates that gender does not significantly have a main effect, and even for the model fit, it doesn't really do anything. It actually decreased it. So in overall, gender just doesn't do anything for people. Well, let me not say gender doesn't do anything. There's no significant gender differences in rating. But once again, when we get to that interpretation portion of the video, I'll highlight that a little bit more. However, when we keep moving further, when we look at our interactions, we see that the model fit goes back up. So including rudeness and gender increases the model fit. Class and gender also increases the model fit. Rudeness and class increase the model fit, and as well as the inclusion of all three variables, so that three-way interaction improves the model fit as well. And all of these values are significant. So in the next portion of the video, I'm going to highlight, get off. In the next portion of the video, I'm actually going to go through the interpretations and what this means for the data. In addition to that, when I'm going to be talking about the contrast, I'm going to be pulling it from the multi-level linear model, just because I feel with this one it's just going to be easier to quickly pull from. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video.